Party on, Todd.
Party on, Sal.
Rock on.
Rock on.
Well, welcome back, POJCasters, to another rockin' episode of the Party on John cast, a podcast all about theology, what we're drinking, righteous music, and various topics. So I'm Reverend Sal Marco, validated a teaching elder in the Presbyterian Church, USA, in the validated ministry of hospice chaplaincy.
And I am the Rockin' Reverend. It sounds so pompous when I say I am the Rockin' Reverend, but I do, I like to rock. So I'm the Rockin' Reverend Todd Laddick. I serve as an ordained elder in the United Methodist Church of Greater New Jersey, serving a congregation in New Jersey, in Newton, New Jersey, to be exact. And I have the more Calvinist beard.
Unfortunately. It was God's providence and predestined. And only once a week is he on higher ground than me.
This is true. You still can't get away from that.
Can't get away from that. Although, as was pointed out by our colleague this week, at least I can walk out the door and be like, haha.
Exactly.
Have no worries.
Exactly. My being on higher ground was really the least of your worries there.
Indeed.
Unless there was an avalanche, my church came crumbling down.
That is quite possible.
It is always possible.
Anyway, so this is the Party on John cast.
It is. So that brings us to our events segment.
Events? Peace, distill. Oh no, this is the Wedding at Cana segment.
I'll just say it so I can put in the sound effect. Yes, it is. This is the Hebrew segment. Wedding at Cana style.
Yeah. Wedding at Cana style.
If you don't know that,
you can't get
the Bible. John
exactly.
chapter 2.
I would hope most of you know that reference, being that it was, according to John, the first miracle that Jesus performed.
That's right, one of the Party on Johns.
That's right. I think probably the coolest John.
But... Oh, definitely. So who's going first?
Well, you got a pour, so you want to talk about yours while you pour?
Sure.
Because I've already poured.
Let me do this. You hear that, Sal?
I hear it.
Does that sound beautiful to you?
Glug, 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 glug. Sounds
nice,
good.
Nice, tall, beautiful glass of, and here we go, I'm going to talk about it. The nice, tall, beautiful glass of Château, Virecourt, Conté, 2016, Bordeaux Supérieur, from France. So, and I got this at the whopping price of $11.10. I did see one there that I wanted to get that I was reading about in a book that was, I don't know, like $5.99. Like not $5.99, but $599.
Okay.
There's also a good Scotch, a 75-year-old Scotch there that is $199,000. So it makes the wine look like a walk in the park.
Wow. Yeah. And this
is $11.10, and I will tell you right now. Oh, it's good. Ooh. Nice and dry. Peppery. That definitely has Cabernet Franc in it. Peppery, but bold. And I'm gonna have to take a couple more sips to really feel the, like almost like currant, like a dry, like black currant taste to it with the peppery hints of pepperiness. It's just really, really good. $11.10 all day long. Good French wine.
Can't go wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with a fine French wine.
No. Very good. So I also am drinking wine. I don't know if you could hear that. I'm going to top off my glass. Because I might as well finish the bottle.
I take it you had some earlier this week, or are you boozing it tonight?
No, I had some with dinner a couple of nights ago. So I'm drinking. I don't know if you've heard of 19 Crimes.
I have.
19 Crimes. It's out of California. It's each type of wine is one of 19 criminals. So there's an actual picture of a criminal, and it's what they call living wine labels, where if you download an app and you scan it, the label comes to life. And
which criminal's on your bottle?
So this one is the Snoop Dogg Cali Red.
Kind of hard to consider him a criminal, but he plays that character.
And he probably has a criminal record from.
I'm sure he has. I'm sure he has some. Yeah, I'm sure he has some. Right. He's behaved himself more over the years, but I'm sure he has.
Yeah. Well, he's friends with Martha Stewart now. So he what is his line now? From crook to cook.
From crook to cook, and from cook to crook.
Yeah,
it's kind of funny. You know what? Snoop Dogg's awesome. I don't care what people say. Awesome. I love him.
Yeah.
I love him.
Yeah. So it's a red blend. It's a Syrah and Zinfandel. It's pretty, and like yours, it was only $11 and change.
Yeah, I've not tried the 19 Criminals, but I'm going to have to now, because just the living label is pretty rocking.
Yeah. So what I'll do is I'll send the video to Todd to put in the notes, but I have a video of the living label, so let's see if I can play it. Oh. No, that's not going to work because my headphones are connected.
So you're hearing it in your headphones?
Now that took my headphones away from... all right, can you hear me?
Yep. So what I'm going to say is, because I forgot to show the label, there's mine. It shows the beautiful Château in the region where this wine was grown and bottled. Well, invented and bottled. And like I said, this has Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Merlot. So
nice. I lost my audio, so I only heard half of what you just said. But
you'll hear it.
I'll hear it later.
You'll hear it later.
So yeah, what I was saying is I'll send Todd the video of the living label. But yeah, so 11 and something and change. It's good red blend.
Yeah, so. Sounds like we both got quality wines.
Yep.
Cheap, bottom shelf quality wine.
Yeah, I mean, I also like Coppola wines. They're Merlot, and that's depending where you get it, anywhere from $15 to $20 a bottle, and that's for me. That's a lot for a bottle of wine. So,
my uncle is a wine connoisseur. I mean, he isn't drinking it much like he used to, just for various reasons. But he used to have a wine cellar and everything, and used to spend, he would be a guy that goes out and buys a $600 bottle of wine. But he has long told me that the secret to a good wine is not the price. You can get a very good, inexpensive wine. You can get a very bad, inexpensive wine. You just need to know. You need to know how to taste the wine and how to enjoy the wine and what a wine ought to taste like. And it's an adventure, and you start to learn trial and error. What a good wine is and what a good wine is not. And that's a very good tip.
Yeah, Allison would agree, because Allison worked, her mom's boyfriend runs a new restaurant, but ran a restaurant at a winery, and so she got to know decent wine. And she's a big fan of Pinot Grigio, and she can usually tell by the color and the feel of it if it's a good wine. And one of her favorite wines is actually a $5 Costco brand Kirkland Pinot Grigio. The small bottles of Pinot Grigio from Kirkland, which is the Costco brand, is probably one of her favorite Pinot Grigios.
There you go. Yeah, there you go. I love Pinot Grigio. I love Sauvignon Blanc. I love any good dry wine. I'm more of a red wine drinker, but a good dry white wine is good too. So, and I told Sal that I've actually been out to the Coppola winery, and it's a really cool family-friendly place. They have a pool. They have an area like a museum. Kids can go walk through. They don't care that they're walking through it, and you can sit and taste while your kids are off doing something else. And it makes sense because Coppola is a big family-oriented guy, and he's Italian, so it's just in his blood. And he set up a winery for families to come and enjoy themselves.
Yeah, and we all know those Italians. They give their kids sips of wine at 5 years old anyway. So
absolutely.
They're probably sneaking your kids some wine anyway. So not that I would know as an Italian.
No. It's kind of like a German with beer,
Yeah.
So that is our He Vince segment. It sounds so weird, He Vince. But that brings us to our
most excellent music segment.
Yeah.
Music segment.
Music segment.
Music edition.
Totally couldn't think of anything.
I was gonna say new wave edition, but only my music's new wave. So
yeah, mine's more new world.
I'll go first, I guess.
Yeah, sounds good.
Since you went first with the, I've been on a classic new wave kick lately. Tears for Fears and Men Without Hats, and kind of since that came out of the punk genre, I'm a bit of a punk and hardcore kind of guy. So I've been on a Tears for Fears kick and a Men Without Hats kick. My first ever in-person concert was in 5th grade, 1989. Tears for Fears, Sowing the Seeds of Love tour. But that's not the song I'm going to do. I'm actually going to do from their other album. Why can't I think of the name of the album? Shout, the album with a shout on it.
Yes.
Yeah. Their song Broken. Which I kind of figured kind of goes with what we're talking about today, but more in general, kind of it's just a good summation of humanity. So the song Broken, it's got kind of a funky, like upbeat kind of bass line to it. So you hear it and you're like, oh, this is a good upbeat song, but kind of like the song that you shared last time.
Yeah.
I think, Todd.
Oh, yeah, the Happy House.
So the lyrics are, between the searching and the need to work it out, I stop believing everything will be all right. Broken, we are broken. I'm walking uphill, being turned around and round. Secret in motion when my feet are on the ground. Broken, we are broken. In my mind's eye, one little boy. Anger, one little man. Funny how time flies. So, and if you know the kind of the background of Tears for Fears, anyway, they were in a program together back in the 70s, kind of where the song Tears for Fears, the group name Tears for Fears and the song Shout came from, as they were in a program. I forget the name of the program, but basically you shout out your anger, all your issues, and there's like shouting therapy.
And so, shout, let it all out. These are the things.
So,
yep,
we can do without. So, a lot of their early stuff was about that process and how they met, kind of through their time in this therapeutic program, dealing with their issues. So
cool. Rock on. Tears for Fears are just awesome. So no, can't have anything bad to say about them.
No. And my backup was Men Without Hats. Everyone knows Men Without Hats for their Safety Dance song, but actually their second album, Pop Goes World, which came out in 87, which is around the time I was buying my first CDs and tapes, was an awesome album. Like, I wore that tape out like crazy. So there's a song on there called Tuesday. So check it out.
Yeah, check it out. So I'm going to bring up actually, she's very well known, but most people probably haven't heard of her. At least, people who've listened to this podcast. Jocelyn Pook is a British composer who's been around since the 80s. I mean, she's been alive longer than that, but her music has been, she's been doing her thing since the 80s. And she's actually, just like a lot of modern composers, the way they make their money is through, film scoring and things like that, or, getting asked to do this or that for this organization or that organization. So that's how they kind of get paid. But she has a couple of albums that you can get if you have Apple Music, it's on there. And the song, what I love about her before I go into it. So I don't know if you've seen it, Sal, but the movie Eyes Wide Shut, Stanley Kubrick's last film, she composed the music for that movie. And if you recall, that movie is kind of like that it's very tense, very dark, very like claustrophobic sounding. If you remember the scene, the rather over the top scene where he's at the masked ball, like that, you can't unhear that song. The song is really what makes it as weird and creepy as it is. It's just, she's excellent, but she focuses on the human voice, and she's very, very spiritual. She has one song that came out more recently called Hallelujah, but it's not Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah, and it starts off with a Hebrew person singing in Hebrew, and it's a prayer to God, whatever he's singing. So it's chanting, more or less. So there's a lot of those elements in her music, and she's a violin player. So you got strings, and you got piano, and you got like more strings than piano, but she's just an excellent composer. And the song I'm choosing is off of her album called Untold Things. And it's the 5th track, I believe. If I'm wrong, I'll put it differently in the notes, but I believe it's the 5th track, called Hellfire and Damnation. What I like about her is she brings out the human struggle, and like even in a song named Hellfire and Damnation, there's still hope for something better, but there's despair in there, and the human condition in there, and all of that like just comes out in the music like a flood, and I think it's appropriate for what we're going to talk about, what we've been talking about, what we are going to talk about tonight, and what we'll continue to talk about. Because it's very needed. The human condition is exactly why we find ourselves in the place we are. It's exactly why we see what's happening to George Floyd and people who are suffering oppression and injustice. It's exactly why we see KKK people marching out in the streets. We are sinners. We are walking embodiments of hellfire and damnation. And yet, God's going to change that. There will be a hallelujah that comes out of that eventually.
Yep. We are totes depraved.
Totes depraved. So that's my choice.
But like
if I find a video of it, I'll post it.
Okay. We're totes depraved, but God will work to completion his creation. So in his sovereignty.
Yep.
So nice. So I guess that's our music segment, which kind of brings us to
May the 4th be with you.
And also with you.
Amen.
Amen.
It's our May the 4th segment.
May the 4th. May the Schwartz be with you.
And yes, we did intentionally release. We know we always release on the 1st of the month, but we did intentionally release on the 4th of this month because it is May the 4th.
Yep. And don't forget, beware the revenge of the 5th.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
That's the 2 days of the year.
Yep.
Now, Calvin was initially, they thought he was going to be born on May 1st.
Yes, I remember.
And I was hoping he would be a little late and be born on May the 4th, Star Wars Day. But he decided to come a week early. So
close, but no. Well, close and still a cigar.
That's right. That's right. Todd and I smoked a cigar.
Yep. We had a virtual cigar smoking session.
We did.
So,
but there is still Star Wars pictures in Calvin's room. So,
amen. So, I guess what we're going to talk about, if I'm not mistaken, Sal, is what is each of ours, and we may even pick the same one. We'll see. Mm-hmm. What is our favorite all-time Star Wars film? And I think we should break it down into 2 categories. First, our all-time favorite of the original 3, and then our next favorite out of the whole universe, or out of the whole, cinematic universe.
Yeah. So you want to go first? You want me to go first?
I'll go first.
I think we probably are going to pick the same movies, but
probably are.
We shall see,
because we're both diehard fans. So my favorite of the 3 is absolutely Empire Strikes Back. Like, hands down, that film is. All 3 of them are good. You couldn't have Empire Strikes Back without A New Hope, and you couldn't, and without Empire Strikes Back, you obviously wouldn't have had Return of the Jedi. All of them are good, but man, Empire Strikes Back, Luke going to visit Yoda. I mean, the whole thing is just crazy good.
Yeah. I thought they smelled bad on the outside. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's also my favorite of the original trilogy. That's my favorite. There's something to be said for, I think, now this isn't always true, but I think especially for Star Wars, I think the second out of trilogies, it tends to be, in my opinion, the best or the better of the film, because they've kind of flushed out the first one a little bit. Mm-hmm. There's could be said about the Godfather trilogy, could be said about Star Wars, it could be.
And we are, by the way, talking about the original trilogy of Star Wars, not
the original trilogy,
not the prequels. We know the best prequel, the best of the prequels was definitely Revenge of the Sith, but even then, it was,
Yeah. So we're talking about 4, 5, and 6, not 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, I did like
4, 5, and 6.
Right, I did like 3. I liked 3 out of the 3. That's confusing. Out of the 3 prequels, Revenge of the Sith is what brought it back to where it should have been to begin with. They should have never left. They should have never left that. But it was a long. Yeah.
The of the prequels, 1 and 2 could have been the first half hour of the third one.
Absolutely, they could have just made the third one a little longer and summed up the first 2 movies. Yeah. And then it would be less complaints. I mean, there are those diehard pain in the butt Star Wars fans that are going to complain about anything beyond the original 3, and yet they'd be pissed off if only the 3 existed and there was no Star Wars universe. So they're the kind of people that you can't win on either side of it. So
I think it's funny that the people that hated the prequel trilogies were people our age, Gen X folks, and we screamed the prequels are made for kids, and yet the original
were made for kids. Yeah, and the kids who grew up with the prequels love the prequels.
Yeah,
and I think that's
their original trilogy. And
that is why I think George Lucas understood this. I don't think the original fans understood. The Gen Xers understood that George was reaching a new generation of kids, and what worked in the 70s would not work in the late 90s.
Yeah.
So,
and he was, looking back, he was the first to take a movie and parlay, because the original movies really in the box office did okay, but really where he made his money and everyone thought he was crazy but where he made his money was licensing the film to toys.
Yeah.
Only after the movies came out and were in the theaters did the toys skyrocket.
Yeah. By the way, a lot of people when Star Wars came out in the theater, a lot of people thought it was like garbage. You'll still hear people like, "Oh, Star Wars? Heck no, Star Trek." But they're two different beasts.
It was seen as a cheap, not cheap, but kind of a cheesy spaghetti western.
Yeah.
Which it was. It was a play on spaghetti westerns and samurai films.
Yes.
So it was a space opera.
And it had a political message that, not that Star Trek didn't, but it didn't in a lot of ways. Like Star Trek came out of the era of the Cold War, right? And yes,
civil rights movement.
And civil rights movement. And yes, sure. So did Star Wars was not post civil rights, but post civil rights in the sense that had already happened and was happening, but it was still in the Cold War. But it came out rather than the baby boomer generation, it came out for the Gen Xers who questioned everything. Yep. And you see that questioning of everything in Star Wars. Like nothing is secure in Star Wars.
And whereas Star Trek was a Cold War. Star Trek was Cold War. Star Wars was more of the end of the 70s, coming out of the Vietnam and questioning everything and kind of
the system's out to get you.
Yep.
The Empire Strikes Back. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly what it is. And I like the fact that George Lucas, even in the prequels, he never lost that sight. Like the prequels had their political message for sure. Yep. And one of my favorite lines comes out of actually Attack of the Clones, where it's not Princess Amidala anymore, but Senator Padme, where she says, and this is how democracy dies, with thunderous applause.
Say that.
Yep. And you look at our own democracy, what we just saw on January 6th, and it's like, that's prophetic, man. This is how democracy dies.
And that came out around the time of the Iraq War.
Yes, it did. Yes, it did.
Yep.
So brilliant storytelling. Yes, I do think that he focused a little too much on CG effects and a little less on story, but the story's still there. It just the first one drug. The second one had a little more import, and the third one was like, finally, we're back.
The first one, I mean, and I don't know if he was, and this could be part of our discussion later, I don't know if he was fully aware of just the racial stereotypes that he put in the first one.
Yes.
With,
Jar Jar.
The trade, with Jar Jar and the Trade Federation. Like he blatant stereotypes of Asian people and black people.
Yep.
I mean, that the actor who did Jar Jar said that was the worst thing for his career ever. So he couldn't get past it.
Yeah.
Because of but there's also a lot
Jar
of
Jar just sucked all together.
Yeah. Now there is a Star Wars theory that Jar Jar was a Sith Lord because it was all an act. And if you actually look at the storyline, he was involved in every major turning point in the plot. So
right. So who knows?
That's another podcast.
That's another podcast. So anyway, we've named our favorite of the original trilogy. What's your favorite of the broader cinematic universe? So
my favorite is not of the trilogy proper. It's a Star Wars story. So it was Rogue One. So much so that I got it tattooed on my arm. Mm-hmm. Rebellions are built on hope. What I liked about the Star Wars stories, and I'm excited about not only Mandalorian, but the Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Whenever it comes out.
Yep, which is coming out with Ewan McGregor.
Yep.
And what's his name?
Hayden Christensen. Yeah, Hayden Christensen. Yep. Yeah. I'm so excited he's back. People piss. Pardon me. People piss on him it wasn't his fault. Like when you see what he did in Revenge of the Sith, just sends goosebumps up your arms when you're watching that fight between him and Obi-Wan.
Yeah. People give him a hard time because he had to do his best to act his way out of a bad script.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I liked the idea of they made a motion picture out of essentially 6 seconds of scroll, this insignificant scroll at the beginning of A New Hope that says, about the spies stealing the Death Star plans. So while it's not focused around the trilogy characters proper, it still ties into the story because it's about how in A New Hope they were able to destroy the Death Star.
They also answer the vulnerability issue. Like one of the biggest critiques of the original movie was, how could you build something so technologically advanced like that, a planet killer, and leave such a gaping vulnerability where you just send a missile down this one hole and it'll just blow the whole thing up, They explain how that happened. When I won't give it away for those who haven't watched it, but they give a very plausible, good explanation.
Very good explanation.
Yeah.
Good and plausible because it's that theme of fighting against Empire.
Yeah.
And what empires can do to people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think out of all, like, even though Empire Strikes Back, I think it's the grittiest of the original trilogy. Rogue One, I think, is the grittiest of all of the Star Wars movies because, number one, it treats the war properly. It's actually, I would consider Rogue One a war movie.
It's a war movie, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's not just a sci-fi movie; it's a war movie.
It's a war movie, absolutely. And honestly, if I were to rate all of the movies from best to worst, and I agree with you, Rogue One is my favorite out of the ones beyond the trilogy. But I would even say Rogue One's better than the trilogy. And Rogue One shows you the stakes. And honestly, without what happened in Rogue One, there would be no trilogy. So yeah, it's just great.
Some would argue that it's not the best either. I would argue that Rogue One, Empire Strikes Back, and possibly New Hope are the top three.
Agreed.
Because New Hope is so gritty, and or Rogue One, not New Hope. New Hope builds on the idea of hope, but I think Rogue One. I was so moved by the scene that I got it tattooed on my arm, where Jin is in the planning room with all the generals and stuff, and they say, "You expect us to attack an Imperial station on nothing more than hope," and she says, "But rebellions are built on hope."
Amen. They so are.
Amen.
If you were hopeless, you wouldn't start a rebellion.
You wouldn't fight back. Yeah, you wouldn't fight back if you had no hope.
Yeah.
And it speaks to the idea of, when you are so oppressed and beaten down, there's that one little spark that can ignite a rebellion.
Absolutely. And this is stepping outside of the Star Wars universe big time, but that's what I love about the show Handmaid's Tale, because there again are people who are so oppressed, and yet they're able to find the hope to continue on and to fight, to resist. Even when that seems like a hopeless effort, they have enough hope to do it. And it's that same principle that rebellions are built on hope. It's the hope of something better, the hope of overcoming the injustice, the hope of overcoming oppression. And that's so central to Star Wars. I mean, it's just so central to Star Wars. So I would agree with you. I think my top 3 Star Wars films of all times are definitely Rogue One, definitely Empire Strikes Back, and then A New Hope. I don't consider Revenge of the Sith low on my list, but it's not at the top of my list either. I think it's a good film, and if like you said, they didn't have the first 2 to kill everybody's anger everybody and kill everybody's interest, you would, I think standing on its own, it would have been a great film, and it would have been more accepted than it was. Yeah. And I think that the actors were unfairly, especially Hayden Christensen, were really pissed on unfairly for it, but
yeah,
that's my view. Okay. So then out of one last thing for this, and then we'll move on. Out of the newest sequels, which is your favorite?
This is a tough one because I'm going with my theory of the middle film of the trilogy is usually the best one.
Mm-hmm.
So I think The Last Jedi, for all the critiques that it had, I think of that trilogy was the most spiritual.
It was
the most kind of finding your inner identity, your inner calling, so to speak. But so that was my favorite of the, and then the third one I think was really good.
Yeah, and I would put the third one. I enjoyed the third one better because for one reason and one reason alone. I think they were on equal par. I think people again unfairly criticized The Last Jedi. It was an excellent film. They criticized. I don't even really fully understand the criticism of it, to be honest with you. But the only thing that irked me about The Last Jedi was Princess Leia, force propelling through space. That was like they could have done without
like
that.
Superman.
Yeah, it literally was like Superman 2 with the Zod and his cronies flying through space. It was bad. It was just bad.
Yeah, it was bad.
But other than that,
but minus that, the whole idea of that last spark of hope of the one general flying the ship through as she jumped to light speed.
Powerful.
It was powerful.
Yeah,
I think
that's the only flaw in the film. That is the only flaw, and it's so small of a flaw you can look past it. You cringe and you laugh, and then it's gone.
Yeah.
And the rest of the film stands on its own. Yep.
I think the Last Jedi it serves that, like I said with Empire Strikes Back, it serves that bridge of okay, let's flesh these characters out spiritually and stuff. And then I would put after that the Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah,
because I think because it had the theme. Yeah, Rey was technically not the Skywalker, but she was.
She was. Yeah.
She was of the family because of the connection to the Force and the
spiritual connection. And that's what I like about it. It's not about blood relations, which all of the films up to this point have been focused on blood relations. Yeah. These films took it away from that and said, no. There's a relation more powerful than blood, and that is spiritual.
Yeah. And it ties into, Paul's theology of adoption.
Yeah, absolutely. It totally does. Absolutely.
Totally.
Absolutely does. And
we were all adopted in the family of God, just like she was adopted into the family of Skywalker.
And what I really loved about it and why I put that one on top is because I love that one has the stakes at its damnedest, at its highest. The evil of the Emperor trying to manifest itself back into life. And the idea that evil is always lurking around the corner waiting to devour you, and somebody has to stand up to it. That was so present in the Rise of Skywalker that so those two are pretty much on equal ground for me, with a slight edge to Rise of Skywalker for me.
Yeah, slight edge for me was The Last Jedi, but I also. The theme in The Rise of Skywalker also was just like in Revenge of the Jedi, the idea of redemption, where at the end of, Luke fulfills the prophecy by redeeming his father.
Yep.
At the end of The Rise of Skywalker, Han Solo redeems his son.
Right. So you're speaking of Return of the Jedi.
Return of the Jedi
and the last Rise of Skywalker.
Rise of Skywalker. Yeah, that scene where Ben sees his dad.
Yes. Which, by the way, was so hard to watch in The Force Awakens. I mean, every one of those films are great. The Force Awakens was such a happy sight for me. Like, it's like Star Wars is back, and it's back for real. Someone's taking this seriously and bringing it to the next level. Praise God. Right. And one of the things that made that way for me was the decision to get rid of Han Solo, which was, by the way, Harrison Ford's idea. He knew that he needed to pass the baton. The time had come, and this was the most fitting death for him. You know, trying to save his family, trying to redeem his son. The father laying down his life. I mean, it's just, again, the spirituality there. It's like,
And then in the Rise of Skywalker, he succeeds.
And he succeeds. Yeah, he succeeds. Yep. That's right. The death, it was not the end for Han Solo.
Yep.
There's resurrection there. So, great stuff. All right. So we're going to move on from that topic.
We could talk about that all night, but
we could just make that the podcast. Yeah. So the next thing we're going to do, and this is our main topic, and it's going to be our main topic, I think, for a while, because it needs to be addressed, and you can't address it in just one sitting. And that is racism. So we have a couple shows that we're going to talk about, and we're going to keep looking for shows to bring to your attention to have you watch. And so which one do you want to go with first, Sal?
You want to go with them first?
Let's go with them first. That's in fact, I would encourage people to watch them first and then watch the other one we're going to tell you about in a little bit, because them is so creepy and disturbing. Yeah. And the other one is more fun and easier to watch. So it's better to start off with heavy and lighter. But it's relative. It's still not that light even in the other one. But okay, so the first one we're going to talk about is the show Them on Prime.
Amazon Prime. Is set in the 1950s, Watts, California.
Yeah.
You know, which, if you know any of the history, you know, Watts in California now is a predominantly African-American city.
And actually, Watts was one of the locations where they move in is Compton.
Compton. Why was I thinking Watts?
Because her family members live in Watts, which is not too far away. That's why. They're both in there.
West Compton. Mm-hmm. Everyone knows Compton nowadays because of NWA, Straight Outta Compton. It is a predominantly African-American area. But this is set in the 50s when the first family to move into Compton, first African-American family, and everything that surrounds it. And they were fleeing, ironically, the racist South.
Yeah, and that's what was really, you hear about white, and I'm sure you did too in seminary, you hear about white flight and all of that, but that, when you read it in a book, it's less real. You know what I'm saying? It's just words on a book, and you don't really put two and two together. And you hear like, Straight Outta Compton, and you're like, oh, this is great. It's about the hood and, blah, blah, blah. And not that that's great, but like, you enjoy the music, you get that that's where they're from. And this is what life in Compton's like. Well, this shows you what life in Compton was like in the 50s, where it was Main Street, USA, Disney, American Dream, white suburbia.
White suburbia, manicured lawns, perfect lawns.
Yep. It was straight out of the Truman Show.
Yep. Yeah. Car in every, a new car in every driveway, a stay-at-home wife in every house,
Yep. Leave It to Beaver home.
Leave It to Beaver.
Yep.
And this really, there was a mini series on ABC back in the 90s about the Civil War. And I will never forget the scene where there's one of the Southern characters is traveling on a train with one of his slaves. And the slave says, she prefers the South because at least the racism is on billboards. Right. Basically, in the South, she knew her place because racism was front and center.
Yeah.
It was printed on the billboards, whereas in the North, it wasn't on billboards, but it was still printed on people's hearts.
Yeah. In the South, you've got a clear warning. You better not catch your head caught without the sun. The sundown towns where if you were a Negro, so to speak, and you were caught out at night in a town, you could be lynched, and nobody would stop them.
Yep. Whereas in Where in the North, it was like, oh yeah, we're free up here, but there was still discrimination, and it was hidden in their heart, not out for display, which is really what this show them really highlights is, the struggle of not only being the first African American family to move into a neighborhood, a white neighborhood, but also it deals with this systemic racism of how the housing market and finance. Like they actually had districts that they would not lend to because of African Americans.
They made the African Americans sign disclosures that on the disclosure said Negro blood ain't allowed here. Like literally said that. And they're like, well, what? So are we allowed to move here? Oh, don't worry about that. They can't enforce it. Yeah,
they can't enforce it. And also the rates, the interest rates would be twice, if not 3 times what the white families would have, so that they took them longer to pay it off.
Yep. And the idea was to paint a picture that this is a welcome and friendly place for Black people when it was actually just as hostile, differently, but just as hostile as Jim Crow South.
Yeah, we'll let you in at these ridiculous rates, but we'll do everything we can to make you leave
and keep you in your place. Yeah, even to the point of having the police. The police were in on it. Like, oh yeah, we'll let these people in, and we'll make sure that nobody wrestles them too much. But really, they were on the side of the people, wrestling them, so harassing them. Yep. And this is a creepy film. One of the constant themes that comes up is blackface, played by an African American who's wearing blackface. So it's a Black man wearing blackface. So it's like a caricature of the caricature of Black people.
Yeah.
And he represents, without giving too much away, but he really represents how racism plays on the psyche of Black people. We obviously racism and bias creep into white people. We're taught it. Racism isn't natural. It's taught. And we learn to be biased against people. We learn to see the color of skin as different. So yes, those types of like blackface and those types of characters helped promote racism among white people, but it also helped degrade self-image among Black people.
Yeah, this blackface in the movie was essentially this character's subconscious.
It's subconscious.
And it was basically saying be a good black person. Don't disturb the white folks.
Yeah. Oh Lordy, you don't want to be messing with that. That's right. Yeah. And at first you're like, what is this about? But it becomes more and more clear as it goes on. Also, they use and I don't know if this book was a real book or if it was made up, but they use this book of a teacher who teaches kids manners and this and that, which seems innocuous at first. Like, we give our kids these books. Then you realize the subtle hidden racism that exists in there. Yeah.
And it made me think this morning when I dropped Calvin off for daycare this morning, because he's walking now. So I put him down, and the young girl who came to get him at the door was a person of color. And he kind of walked into the room, and then he stood there like, where am I supposed to go? Like taking it all in. And so the young girl said, "Here, Calvin," and reached out her hand. He said, "Okay." And he reached up and took her hand and walked with her back to the classroom. And I was like, that is like just the innocence of, he doesn't care that she's of color or that she's not white.
Has no concept. This is
a person I trust. I'm going to walk with him.
Yep. Has no concept of it.
No concept of it. And you see that in this movie too, with the daughters. I mean, the one daughter sees the scary person in the basement, the teacher in the basement, and then the older daughter who's in high school, who you realize that, well,
without giving too much away, but she befriends a white girl, we'll say.
Yeah, she befriends a white girl
who creeps into her conscience.
Yeah, pretty much.
And without giving too much away, basically this white girl befriends her and is completely nice to her, but there's something off about the way she, oh, you're pretty for a black girl, and what that does to the psyche of the child, who then sees herself as other. And that's so sad and tragic when you see yourself as the other, and you want to be different than who you are because you want to be accepted. Yeah. It's just a powerful film. It'll have you at the edge of your seat. It'll have you creeped out. The imagery does not go away after watching it, but it'll have you bawling your eyes out, and it'll make you aware of what it's like to be black in this country.
Yep.
In a way that I think every white person should, by default, in order to be a citizen of this country, should have to watch that.
But it also deals a little bit about what it's like as a white person to just the idea of power and not wanting to disrupt the status quo. There's the preacher character who, they have this idyllic community that lets in these two black folk.
Yep.
But then the group mentality and the desire to keep the peace and to keep his control over the group as the preacher leads him to racism.
And the wives, I mean, like the main character, the main wife, like at first you think that she's got the greatest life ever and her life is grand and there's no problems until the black people move in. But what you realize is actually her life is already a cracked mess, and the outside is just a facade. And of course, what do you do when your life is spiraling out of control? You find scapegoats. And who are the scapegoats? Your black neighbors. But really, the black neighbors weren't the problem. It was the other things that were attacking her in her life, mainly the broken marriage, the white male hierarchical patriarchal society that she found herself in. Those were the enemy, not the black people. But of course, what do? You fear what you don't know, and what you don't know are those people over there. And so that's who became. What you
often do when you're unhealthy is you project your stuff onto others.
Like I don't know if you found this to be the case. You found like almost that you wanted to hate her, but you couldn't because you felt pity for her. You
felt bad for her.
That's what I liked about this film. It didn't try to make you hate white people. It made you feel pity for white people for not seeing the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And there were some people in there that you could hate pretty easily, but it wasn't so like white people are bad and black people are good. It was just like this is
it wasn't a white guilt kind of thing, like, we suck as white people. This is we as white people have our own foibles and our own depravity.
Yeah.
That because we are part of a bigger system, we don't see it, and we end up being the baton of the system, even though we don't realize that we're doing it.
Yeah, and ironically, these white people thought that this black couple were the ruination of their neighborhood, when really they were ruining the neighborhood themselves.
Yeah.
Had they had a different response to this black family moving in, the neighborhood would have been just fine. Yep. That's not to say every black person who moved in would have been a good neighbor, or every white person would have been a good person. People are people. But if you treated people equally, you'd have your bad neighbors, and you'd deal with those bad neighbors as any neighbor does. But the majority of the neighborhood would be whole. And instead, what happened? People one by one started moving out, and with them went the money. And what ended up happening is a white, well-to-do suburb turned into the projects. Mm-hmm. And this is history, folks. This may be a fictional story, but it's a historical fiction.
Yep. Happened in New York City, in the Bronx, when they put the highway through the Bronx, the white flight.
Yep.
Happened in, if you just read the history of the Bronx, like the Bronx at one point was farmland and was the suburbs of Manhattan.
Yeah.
Was the rural suburbs of Manhattan.
Yep.
There is still an enclave of wealth in the Bronx. But as soon as that highway was put in, white people got out faster than,
than bleach typically does.
Yeah, exactly.
So that is a good segue into the second show, because the second show focuses another white suburb, Chicago, particularly the south side of Chicago. the white suburb of Chicago to the south, that by the time we get to it, is already becoming a predominantly black neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's the same thing that happened in Compton. White people or black people escaping Jim Crow moved to New York. They moved to Chicago. They moved to Compton and Watts and Memphis or what did you say?
Minneapolis.
Yeah, not Memphis. Memphis would have been Jim Crow South, but yeah, Minneapolis. They moved to all of these different places, and what happened in those places are the same thing that happened in Compton. You know, people, they resisted, they terrorized, they humiliated, they intimidated, and then they split because they weren't going to live next to no Negro, and that was the attitude.
Yep.
And your house value to this day, still to this day, your house value drops if black people live in your neighborhood.
Yep. Which goes back to the systemic financial.
Yeah. So no, we're not, you know, I agree. I think, not to get political, but I think the Vice President Harris had an appropriate response this morning to Tim Scott, who said, we're not a racist country. America's not a racist country. She said, I agree. America is not a racist country, but it has racism built into its system. And we need to do everything we can to eradicate that. So yeah, no, America doesn't stand for racism. The idea of America, most Americans themselves don't want to see black people dead in the streets or, you know, but we benefit from systems that were put in place for racist purposes.
Yep.
And they're still in place. And they shouldn't be.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And unfortunately how you see that coming to play nowadays is these areas.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
Oops. I don't know why Siri responded to that.
Anyway. Do you have a male Siri voice?
I guess I have it set to a male Siri voice now.
That's interesting.
But so what you see now is, like you said, the house values go down because of who moves in. White flight, everybody moves out, property values go down.
Yeah.
What you see now, especially in areas like Newburgh, New York, parts of Brooklyn, parts of New York City, white flight happens. All the white people leave, take their money with them. Property values go down because of all of the lower income people of color move in because it now is affordable. And then you get gentrification where the white people move back in.
Yes.
And so the cycle happens over again where, like, you see it happening now with Newburgh, with like Orange County, New York, where, you know, folks are moving out of the city to these rural counties because it's cheaper, and then which then allows the white people to move back into the city, take over these cultures and these diverse neighborhoods, and
as black people move out to rural areas, the white flight still exists.
Yep. So never ending. It's a hamster wheel of disparity.
Yeah, and what I loved about Lovecraft Country is it's based off of a book that was inspired by H.P. Lovecraft's work in general. But the book marries H.P. Lovecraft and the horror, the sci-fi kind of psychological horror that his work entails, to racism. And the real neat thing about it is we live in a day of cancel culture. Like Blazing Saddles would never get made in today's time because people just, you know, it's like what Jack Nicholson said, you want the truth, you can't handle the truth. Right? Like, that's kind of where we live right now, where people, you know, like art is continually being criticized because it's offensive this way or it's offensive that way, when art is meant to offend. It's meant to agitate. Yeah. It's meant to upset the order of things. That's kind of what art does. And so what I loved about this was H.P. Lovecraft was a brilliant author. He was a troubled man, but he was a brilliant author. and had brilliant stories that were underappreciated mostly while he was alive and became since beloved, ever since. Things like the Call of Cthulhu, which became a Metallica song at some point, and on Ride the Lightning, and you have the whole Cthulhu mythos, the Dunwich Horror, like The Color Out of Space, which there's a new movie on Shudder now, but with Nicolas Cage, which is phenomenal. So he's really been a heavy influence for a lot of people. So he was a great writer, brilliant writer, but he was a flawed man, and he had racist views, as a lot of people in his time did. Heck, the founder of Planned Parenthood was all for eugenics, like these people, were not perfect. Nobody is. So rather than cancel him, this black producer and writer decided to adopt a story out of a book. I forget who the author was who wrote the book, but basically what they did was, instead of canceling H.P. Lovecraft, they update him and they bring his world of horror to the screen, and within it, they put in the horror of racism. So it both appreciates his work and also comments on it. Not that his work itself was in any, not that racism came through explicitly in any of his work, but they comment on the person, the flawed aspects of that person. And
the story revolves around this dealing with the horror of racism in Lovecraft country. So basically, all of these Lovecraft type scenarios are happening in this particular part of the country, which happens to be New England, which happens to be very racist, and that's where they go to settle these things, this connection with the family. And so by going to Lovecraft country is how they deal with the horror of racism. And it kind of upsets the narrative, because their connection to the paranormal of Lovecraft Company is to this black family. So
and without giving too much away, the family basically, for reasons which we will not say, has an inheritance into this white family's not only their estate, but their magical properties and their order, because, well, we're not going to say why, but it involves racism. Like they used black people in a way, and one of their servants ran away with the book and had a child, and that child was a part of the family. Now,
think Thomas Jefferson,
white person in power having sex with a black servant, and so her servant gets pregnant, and now the child's in the lineage. So that's what ultimately happens. And they mix all of these weird, like H.P. Lovecraftian Cthulhu mythos stories together with this family who's struggling to find their identity outside of what white America tells them they are. And I just... like it was just so brilliant. It's fun. It has elements of Indiana Jones in it. It has elements of, it's just a wide range of different things. So that's why I suggest watching them first and then going to this one. This one's more enjoyable. Yeah. But it definitely talks about racism.
And they take place pretty much in the same time frame, early 50s, whereas them deals with the changing dynamics of Compton. One of the main sub-stories of Lovecraft Country is they go to the funeral of, they go to one of the public viewings of Emmett Till, whose killing sparked the civil rights movement.
And the girls, the girl in the girl in the family was friends with Emmett Till and knew Mammy, Emmett's mom. And just how much that affected that community. And then, of course, as you're seeing people lined up in droves to go to this funeral, it looked like something out of a Black Lives Matter funeral today, but people lined up in droves to see Emmett Till. And what's remarkable about Emmett Till, and I dare you, if you're listening to this, to Google Emmett Till. and Google specifically Emmett Till's body and look at the images.
Yep.
Here was a 14-year-old boy who lived in the south side of Chicago, who was visiting family down in Mississippi, and got lynched and got beaten. His face beaten until it was unrecognizable. Then they tied a mill fan to a cotton mill fan, I believe, to his neck with barbed wire and threw him into a river.
Yep. So look at Google before and after pictures. See this young, handsome black kid, and what happened. And his mother very bravely decided, nope, that's how I want people to see him. I want people to see the effects of racism.
Yeah, she refused to have. They were trying to insist that she have a closed casket, and she refused to have a closed casket. So people got to see his dead corpse that had been in a river, bloated, mutilated, unrecognizable. He looked like a monster. The way he looked in that casket, totally dehumanized to every literal sense you can think of. And he was a 13 or 14-year-old boy who, and the reason why he was lynched, he supposedly whistled at a white girl who years later confessed that he never did.
He didn't. Yeah.
So, Emmett Till. So yeah, it really does address racism in a very profound, powerful way, but is a little more on the lighthearted side. Them is not lighthearted by any stretch of the imagination. Well, this is a good place, I think, for us to leave it. Definitely check out. We'll put the trailers for both shows into the notes. Definitely check out them. Then watch Lovecraft Country, and we'll be back next time with another recommendation. And friends, we got to talk about this. This isn't something we can just put down because, Chauvin went to jail. No, it's not over. Justice happened for Chauvin's family in the extent that accountability happened. But real justice would be George Floyd being alive with his family right now.
Yep.
And until we have black men and women and children being able to live safely without fear of their lives in this country, we don't have justice.
No.
And without justice, there is no peace.
Yep. Justice would be black men and women not fearing for their lives because at a simple traffic stop.
Yeah, at a simple traffic stop. Being pulled over because you had an air freshener hanging on your window. So that's where we're going to leave it. But we do recommend you watch those films. And as always, well, not as always, but specifically today and always, may the 4th be with you. And be excellent to each other.
And don't be a jerk.
Rock on.
Rock on.